Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. It is Monday, March 9th, 2020, and other than the stock market and oil prices, I hope your Monday is going well. We have a lot to talk about today, including my thoughts as a non-medical person on this whole coronavirus thing. I'm going to throw my opinion into the ring. We'll do that before I sign off. I think you will find it very interesting, some insight from yours truly. I hope you'll stick around and listen to what I have to say. I think it'll be helpful. We'll see. All right, let's get on with it. A lot to discuss today. We'll start out with a look at the wide shot of the Atlantic Basin. Again, this time of year, most of the energy is going to be confined up here to the mid and upper higher latitudes. Very little energy in the way of sensible weather features down here in the deep tropics. We are slowly shifting our seasons, as you know, and we will gradually start introducing tropical waves down here, and more energy will start to coalesce in this region as the jet stream and any influences of mid-latitude storm systems begin to retreat north. But for now, still a fairly stormy time in the northern hemisphere, and a little bit of that weather. We had a front come through, strong high pressure now over the western Atlantic building in. Going to be a nice mild to very warm week in the east. But there's a little bit of weather down here in the islands. So I thought, why don't we take a quick look, a little bit of a tour around some of our nest cams that we have. This is from St. John. This is earlier today down in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We can skip around on the timeline and show you how things have progressed. This was just before 1 p.m. Eastern time today. This is what it looks like currently. We'll move it out to the current time. A little bit of a rain foot out there over the Caribbean. This is down in the Cruz Bay area. This is from Brent's house. Brent is one of our patrons and our supporters and our field operations guys. In fact, let me click the live button so we make sure it's absolutely live. There we go. Look at that. I call that a rain foot. Little rain shaft right there. Pretty heavy rainfall. I haven't heard that there's any lightning down there, but just some passing showers because of this fairly stiff northeast flow coming through here. Just enough moisture over the warm Atlantic and Caribbean vicinity, pushing in some instability, a few showers there. You need the fresh water, so I guess it's not a bad thing as long as it doesn't get too heavy and out of hand. And if we look over at St. Thomas, this camera hosted by another one of our supporters. We appreciate that very much. Timothy over there in the St. Thomas area. Earlier today, some rain showers here as well. Again, we can kind of skip around on the timeline. This is one of the many neat features of these nest cams that we use. This is from just a little while ago, some heavier rain squalls moving through. Shouldn't call them squalls. I mean, it's not even that windy down there, but again, you need the fresh water, so I guess it's not all that bad of a situation, considering the fresh water falling from the sky is what fills up your water tanks, your cisterns, as I call it. That's what they call them on Bermuda, I think. Anyhow, this is what it looks like down in the islands. I also want to show you, just real quick, where is it? Out west, our camera hosted by our good friend and colleague Paul in Pahrump, Nevada. This is outside of Las Vegas. Las Vegas would be over here on the other side of the Spring Mountains. Some cloud cover moving in. We are going to have a storm system to bring some wet weather to the southwest, the west coast, especially the southwest portion of the U.S., and that is a good thing. It's good to sometimes say that bad weather is a good thing. You need the rainfall, especially out west. You need it in parts of the Caribbean, that fresh water falling from the sky. So there you go, a little bit of a tour around the region. Now, let's do a little bit different tour. This is more of our educational part of these updates, where I try to learn you, as they say, about some different things geographically and meteorologically and otherwise, oceanographically. I guess you throw it all in. So this is the ENSO regions. That's what we're wanting to look at here. This is a big focal point for when we look at an upcoming hurricane season. What's happening in these regions, what we call the Nino regions. You got Nino areas 1 and 2. Those are located right here off the coast of South America. The Nino 3 area, the Nino 4 area, and then the overlap is the Nino 3.4 area. See how that works? Kind of like, I say, a Venn diagram. And it's really this middle area right here, the Nino 3-4 area, that is watched very closely by people like Dr. Phil Klotzbach and others that do seasonal forecasting. You know, it's interesting, Bill Gray, the late Dr. Bill Gray, and now Dr. Phil Klotzbach and his colleagues, Colorado State was one of the first, if not the first, to really pioneer this more than 30 years ago. Now, a whole host of private entities, public universities, you name it, weather companies, whatever, they're doing seasonal forecasting for tropical cyclones, hurricanes to you and me, and it's not just Dr. Klotzbach and his group, but a majority of these folks do look at what's happening right here in the Nino 3-4 area of the Pacific. Why? Typically because when this area is warmer than average through here, let's just paint it in red, you get a lot of rising air that comes up. We call that upward motion, and that air rises, and this is an oversimplification of it, and it spreads out and sinks across the Caribbean. There's other factors, but this is just one way to try to explain it. The rising air happens here in the Pacific. It sinks in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, creates westerly winds, sinking dry air, and it's just not conducive for Atlantic hurricane development. So when you have this warm, we'll put a big positive in there, that is a big negative for Atlantic hurricane development. So keep that in mind. I think most of you know this that are watching this update, but maybe you're new. Maybe you're new to the world of hurricanes as a whole, and so I'm trying to educate you here on what we look for. And so that leads me into this, the anomalies map, the departures from normal. And look what's happening here. This updated today, March the 9th. The Pacific cooling off there, not quite in the Nino 3-4 area. The Nino 1-2 area, a little bit warmer than average. The Nino 3 into the 3-4 area, it's cooling off. But this is really not the story I want to tell for the Pacific. We'll get back to this part in just a minute. Look at the Atlantic. I mean, wow. Off the coast of Africa, dipping to the southwest into the main development region, quite a bit warmer than the long-term average. All of the Caribbean Sea above average. The Gulf is it's easy to flip-flop the Gulf around. And the subtropical Atlantic up here running above the long-term average. On the whole, the Atlantic basin, the North Atlantic, is running above the long-term average. And we can see that on a different perspective here from the Reynolds method. This is see right there says Reynolds Weekly Sea Surface Temperature Anomaly. This is the methodology generated by Dr. Richard Reynolds down at the National Hurricane Center. And I really like this because it's a weekly average, so this is valid the week ending, I believe that's how it works, March the 7th. So it's only a couple of days. I don't want to say it's even a couple of days old, but that's the time frame, the week leading up to March the 7th. And this really gives you an idea. Most of the main development region, according to this data, is at least 1/4 to 1/2 degree Celsius above the long-term average. And I mean, you can see that. This is not fake news. I mean, assuming this map is right, you got to just trust the source. Oh boy, what a time that we're living in that I even have to say that. But look at the data here. This really helps us to understand all of the North Atlantic here, the tropics and the subtropics up here running above the long-term average, while the Eastern Pacific here especially starting to really get eaten away in terms of the warm anomalies, cold anomalies starting to show up. And we can see that reflected very well in the subsurface anomaly update. This is very important because that subsurface, the upwelling of water where the water is kind of forced to the surface, upwelling we call that, or downwelling when you get strong westerly winds blowing across that warm pool of the Pacific, kind of forcing that warm water down. We call that a downwelling Kelvin wave event. All very scientific terms. In simplistic terms, it means when you get a lot of downwelling, El Nino usually. When you get a lot of upwelling, La Nina. Or more importantly, I believe, is no El Nino. I'm not as concerned as to whether or not we get a La Nina, the opposite of El Nino, as I am that we simply will not have an El Nino this hurricane season. And all of the global modeling, the climate models, all of them now are suggesting that we won't have an El Nino. Whether you look at the Euro or the CFS, the UK Met, the JMA, the CANSIPS, which is the Canadian, you name it, they're all pretty much in line. The Australian Bureau of Meteorology, Access 2 model, or whatever it's called, none of them indicating El Nino conditions for the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season in the general sense. You got some ensemble members that will, these perturbations, kind of wild outliers. Yes, some of those show it. But the general consensus is that cold water that you see lurking all throughout this area, and that is a large expanse of subsurface cold water anomalies, and it is cold for real, not just departures from normal, that this will take over and erase all of this subsurface warmth that remains in the eastern Pacific. You see this starting to take over, and it's going to lead to, I believe, the potential as we couple it with this, of a busy Atlantic hurricane season. We are 83 days away. That's not a long time, and the seasonal forecasts are going to start coming out. We will get the first outlook from a quantitative perspective, how many named storms, how many hurricanes, and an in-depth look at the reasoning behind that from Dr. Phil Klotzbach at the National Tropical Weather Conference down in South Padre Island. That is coming up the first couple of days of April. So that's not far away at all. So as we look at the hurricane outlook and discussion part of this, the hurricane side of it, again, signs are pointing to a busy season ahead, at least the stage being set for it to be a busy hurricane season. It doesn't guarantee that it'll be a busy season. It doesn't mean that people will get hit by hurricanes, but the ingredients are getting into place, it does appear, that we will have a busy hurricane season ahead. No discernible inhibiting factors right now. That's another way to look at it. All right, so moving ahead to lower 48 weather, nice to see the map generally blank, just a few river and otherwise flood warnings. That's what the green areas usually are, hydrologic outlooks and river floods, etc. Weather.gov, a great source here, the biggest crowd-funded weather site in the world. Weather.gov, you pay for it with your taxes. So utilize it. I do. I love it. A little bit of winter weather way up here in Maine, but most of the east here are going to warm up nicely. The printer's over there. Random spirits and ghosts printing out from my printer. I tell you. I don't know if you can hear it on this nice microphone I've got, but just noises. It aggravates me. Anyhow, it derails me. Strong Bermuda high will set up this week, giving the return flow into the south, pumping very warm, moist air. Humidity values will go up, and that's going to warm up the east very nice. Again, the southwest over here is going to have a little bit of a stormy time. Luckily, if we looked at the convective outlooks here, not much in the way of widely organized severe weather. This is the day one outlook today. Here's tomorrow. Starting to show up in the Great Plains, which, by the way, I am 90% sure now that I'm going to be able to take a whole lot of equipment, and I mean a whole lot, out to the Great Plains when we get the first major severe weather outbreak. Plans are in place for me to take a truckload of equipment from North Carolina out to the Great Plains and set it up along several hundred miles covering one of these severe weather outbreaks, either a moderate or a high risk. We'll talk about that when the time comes. But let's just pretend for a second, just to give you a sneak preview, that this was a moderate risk right here. It's not. It's marginal. But let's just pretend. So what I would do is I would set up these cameras all along inside of here, for example. Probably on the east side, another windows, I swear. Along the east side of that risk area is where I'd put these camera systems, pressure sensors, maybe both of our anemometer systems, whatever I can fit in a big old pickup truck and haul it out there. Not to storm chase, no. But more to be like, they say, if I could be a fly on the wall Well, will be a camera on an overpass or a telephone pole or whatever the case may be. 10 camera systems, maybe a couple of weather stations or pressure sensors, just to get a different look at how these severe weather outbreaks unfold, a different perspective. Stationary cameras like a fence, set them up and see what happens. Watch the atmosphere in motion. Understand what goes on from a different perspective than the typical storm chasing done in vehicles. That's very dangerous these days, in my opinion. Just too many people doing it, too many people killed since 2013. And this is just a better way because I can be in 10 places at once. Plus, where I am at the hotel, 11. So stay tuned. That is almost a certainty that we're going to be doing that. And so we'll be watching these maps very closely in the weeks to come. It is severe weather season. So a marginal risk of severe weather in Oklahoma, right in the heart of the alley generally. So keep an eye out for that. That's tomorrow. Moving on out into the middle of the week, that shifts east into Arkansas. Just a general risk of thunderstorms in the lighter green area. Again, no widespread, big-time outbreaks coming up. And you see through day 8, the same is true for that. Let me caution you, though, just real quick. The tornado in the Nashville area of Tennessee, the very deadly tornado, the very tragic tornado event that happened at night, that was not on a particularly dangerous situation type of day. In other words, that was not a high risk. That, to my knowledge, was not even a moderate risk, if I remember. So you can get bad scenarios even on days when you just have a marginal risk. So just keep that in mind. It's very important. I think the big lessons we learned from that tornado event in the Nashville region is to have multiple ways of getting alerts. Your smartphone is great. Your sirens, which are outdoor only, that's what they're meant for. They're not meant to make you hear the sirens inside unless it's right next to your house. But the sirens are not designed for indoor alerts. You need a NOAA weather radio. You need your smartphone with alerts turned on, and you need to pay attention to those sirens. And just basically, the whole principle of this is to be weather aware. Keep it up here that, hey, something could be happening, and if you're more apt to pay attention because you're aware, I think you'll do better if something does indeed head your way, whether it's hurricanes or severe weather or whatever, right? All right, so before we get into the signing off part, I do want to talk just a bit about this whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing and give you my perspective. And you think, what in the world is Mark, a geographer and a hurricane guy, all around weather? I don't know, call me an expert on all the weather, but I love weather, so what in the world is he going to tell me? It's going to help me understand this whole seemingly mass hysteria around this coronavirus thing, and I'll answer that for you. It is this. For the first time in my entire career, I finally truly understand where you are coming from dealing with hurricanes, especially those of you who have very little to no hurricane experience. This coronavirus situation really opened my eyes as to what you all go through every time there's a hurricane coming. I think of one of our good friends on Patreon, Anita, down in Miami, and other people that I have gotten to know over the years. But she's a great example of this. Her fear, her anxiety of every single thing that comes out on social media, on the news, when we're talking about hurricanes. The new Euro just showed this. The GFS just showed that. So-and-so just posted on his Facebook that maybe a Cat 5 into Miami. You think about Irma, Harvey, Maria, going back in time, Katrina, many years ago now. Wow, it's hard to believe we're saying that already. But the hysteria and the hype machine that boils up around hurricanes, severe weather outbreaks, blizzards, but especially hurricanes, is, in a short-term sense, very similar to what we're seeing with this coronavirus COVID-19 deal, this whole situation. And the parallel is even more striking for me personally because my wife works in the emergency department of our hospital here in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's what she went to school for. She's done this for more than 20 years, and she is going to be on the front lines of this when and if it becomes a big deal here in Wilmington in terms of a lot of people being infected. And so the parallel is very interesting to me, because when there's a hurricane threatening, her friends on social media say, what does Mark say about the hurricane? What does Mark think about Florence? What's Mark saying about Irma? And here I am, and some of my friends are asking, what does your wife think about this whole coronavirus thing? Isn't that interesting how the tables get turned, and we see the parallels here? Because I am intelligent, I am college educated, I am a free thinker, I have access through this computer and through this. As good a thing as this can be, sometimes it can be overwhelming, right? We have the tools, and I do personally, to educate ourselves about this phenomenon, whether it's weather and a big hurricane threat that may be coming, or a viral epidemic, pandemic, scare, reality, whatever the case may be. The parallels here between hurricanes and weather in general and the coronavirus situation are very, very striking. And so my advice is this: do what I suggest when a hurricane is threatening, whether it's threatening the islands, where relatively few people live compared to the United States mainland. We can all agree and understand that. Or like an Irma, or a Harvey, or a Florence, or last year Dorian, that's headed towards a big population area. Rely on the sources that best inform you from a factual point of view. You know how I always refer to weather.gov, the National Hurricane Center, voices of reason. And don't flood yourself. Don't allow the noise and the floodgates of coronavirus to take over your life. Don't read Twitter every 5 minutes, every hour. Just read a couple times a day, maybe something from your local government sites, CDC. Ignore as best you can the rest of that noise. Otherwise, it will overwhelm you, very much like the hurricane hype machine will overwhelm us when a hurricane is coming. And the parallel here really is there. And for the first time in my career, I truly, deepest down inside of my soul, understood what you all go through, a vast majority of you who have to deal with hurricanes, that really panic, that really get upset, especially when there's misinformation, there's too much information, and there's hype. I get it now. It's not that I didn't get it before. I get it now 100%. As before, maybe it was 95, all right? I mean, I truly did understand. That's why I got into this 25 years ago, is to better understand how hurricanes impact us as a society. So I'm always trying to develop that skill set and develop that instinct. But this coronavirus deal, this situation, definitely opened my eyes all the way as to what you folks go through when you're dealing with a hurricane coming your way, and I just wanted you to know that. So use the advice that I give you during hurricane threats, and just take a deep breath, and don't consume yourself with it every waking moment, and just be educated about it like I would ask you to do when it comes to weather, and especially hurricanes. All right? So there's my bit about that from not Dr. Mark Sudduth. All right? So there you go. How in the world would Mark tell us anything about a virus? Well, there you go. All right, so back to more pleasant things, at least I hope so. On Patreon, and I will be talking about this more and more because most of what we're going to be doing is on Patreon, because it's a way to support what we're doing, and it's extremely affordable. I mean, just from $1 a month to whatever, $10 to $100. We have all kinds of levels here. But everybody gets to enjoy our podcast on Patreon. Doesn't matter what tier you're on. Stories from the Hurricane Highway. It's a podcast looking back at the 25 years of my career. 1 year, one storm, one event, 1 mile at a time along the metaphorical Hurricane Highway. And then the very exciting television type series, The Hurricane Highway. I have 2 episodes done already. This is already on Patreon, episode 3. about Hurricane Barry is coming soon, hopefully Friday. And all of this is available exclusively and only on Patreon. In midsummer, maybe mid-June or so, not midsummer, but mid-June, I will put this Hurricane Highway TV series on Amazon Prime Video, but not until it's all finished, all 8 episodes, and it goes on Patreon first. So it's included in Patreon, just like included with Prime for Amazon. You get it, or Netflix, or whatever. So here's what Patreon is. It's supporters. They pledge. They help support what we're doing. The future of our work depends on this. As more and more folks get into crowdfunding, it enables me to do things that are very important and to grow, but also to interact with you guys. It's kind of like a funded world of social media that does not cost, $500 a year to join unless you want to. For as little as $1 a month. Again, I've said this before. Look, if just a quarter of my social media following, the aggregate of Facebook, YouTube, Twitter only, if just 25% did $1, that's $12 a year. We'd have all the funding we would ever need, and you guys could, reap the benefits of this by the thousands, right? And we're growing, though. We're getting there. So I'm gonna talk about this more, because this is where the future is headed, where you support what is important to you, and that's what Patreon is all about. All right, we covered a lot. Never in my career did I think I'd be talking about a viral, whatever you want to call it, epidemic, almost pandemic. But here we are. We're talking about it. It's very serious, and I wanted to address that and how the parallels were in our world of weather here and hurricanes, etc. And I hope that you understood what I was saying there, that I get it. All right, so we're all in this together. Wash those hands. Stay healthy, get plenty of sleep, all those good things. Use common sense. That's what I talk about the most when we deal with hurricanes, is to use good old common sense that your mom and dad and the good Lord above gave you, I hope. And, everybody should be okay. We'll get through this, all right? There you go. I am done. I am Mark Sudduth, healthy today. Thank goodness. I'm doing good. And my wife's doing fine as well. I'll keep you updated on that, too, as to how things progress, as much as I can share anyway. All right, that's it. I'm done. I promise. I'm out of here. Have a good rest of your Monday. Thanks as always for tuning in. I do appreciate that. I'll talk to you again early next week.